Now I want to talk a little bit about a lawsuit that I was personally involved in. The lawsuit was against the school district. It was Coulter versus Washington Township. So what was the case all about? Thankfully, I could tell you there's no tragedy in this case. At least nobody died. Now, 8th grade girl, her classmates, 2 of them go to see the counselor and they say, let's call her Mary. Mary's a cutter. I mean, we see the marks on her arms. I mean, when we ask her about it, Mary won't admit she's cutting, but she certainly hangs out with another girl who makes no secret of being a cutter. So the counselor called Mary in and talked with her. The counselor's deposition, which I read, said, I asked Mary about the cuts on her arm. Mary said, I have an all-terrain vehicle. I ride it through the woods. That's how I get these nasty cuts and scrapes on my arm. Counselor's deposition says she called Mom, but the counselor has no documentation of making that phone call. The counselor's deposition said, she said to Mom that I understand Mary has a private therapist, and I suggest that you talk about this possible concern with the private therapist, although Mary denies engaging in any cutting behavior. But the counselor has no record of that phone call. She has no notes. She didn't share that with an administrator or with one of her colleagues. The mom's deposition and version is entirely different. Mom says, I never got that call. I was at that school all the time. The counselor knew and the teachers knew. How did I find out my daughter was engaging in cutting? It was 8 months later. It was the next August when my daughter was hospitalized for a suicide attempt. And when her friends came forward and told me, and the therapist got to the bottom of what had been going on all that time. You know, I asked Mrs. Coulter, I said, well, Mom, what do you want? She said, I want training. I want awareness, which is what I believe we need in our schools and communities. Well, I'm sure if you drop your lawsuit, I'm sure that they will provide training, awareness, and guidelines for the school district. Oh, but I also want $600,000 for my suffering and Mary's suffering. So I was very surprised that it actually went to trial in New Jersey. By the way, one of the things I asked the mother, I said, didn't you ever notice the marks on your daughter's arms? Of course I noticed them. I noticed them for months and months. Well, didn't you ask her about them? Yes, I did. Well, what did Mary tell you? She said she was riding her all-terrain vehicle. That's how she got those marks on her arm. Well, Mom, if you couldn't get to the bottom of this and you live with your daughter for 8 months and she was engaging in this behavior, how could you expect a school counselor to figure it out in 15 minutes? In fact, one young person said something to me that I think is really important. She said, how can the counselor or the mental health professional outside of school expect me to tell them my deepest, darkest secret the first 15 minutes we ever talk with each other? So we're going to have to develop relationships, which is, I believe, a key to prevention of so many things with young people. Well, I wrote a report in the Coulter case and actually tried to be fair. What I said was, I think the counselor called the mother, but I think it's unfortunate that she doesn't have a record of that phone call. And I really think that was the kind of information that should have been shared in a face-to-face conference. And I also think the school counselor should have asked for release of information and should have personally contacted the private therapist to fill her in on what she was suspecting. But the one thing that I truly cannot accept is a counselor who saw a kid in January suspected of engaging in cutting, and the counselor never checked on that child again, and she was in the school for another 6 months. But I want to talk a little bit about the outcome. It was actually very interesting going to the trial, and I actually heard the opening arguments. The opening arguments for the school system were along the lines of, this is a family problem, that's what we have here, you had all these circumstances going on in the family, that's what this case is about, it should never even be here, which actually was a very strong argument. The outcome was that there was a minor slap for the counselor, documentation of notification to the parents should have been more evident. But there were absolutely no monetary damages that were provided to the family as a result. And as I said earlier, the young woman thankfully did not die by suicide. She had some problems in school. The outcome in terms of her education and career, I'm sure, is not what her parents had hoped for. But there were no monetary damages. And as far as I know, that's the only lawsuit of its kind in the country that basically took the schools to court over the question of, do we have a responsibility to notify parents when their child is engaging in self-injurious behavior? I think common sense is we have a responsibility to work collaboratively with parents, make sure they know what's going on in kids' lives. How do we all work together to help the young person? And I also think we can help young people understand why your parents need to know. And absolutely the best scenario is to have the young person tell their parents themselves, but the school personnel, the mental health professional are in that conference, making absolutely certain that the parents are notified and we work to get the needed help for their child. What do the kids say themselves that are engaging in this behavior? They say things like this: I want to feel concrete pain when I'm overwhelmed with psychological pain. It reduces my numbness. It keeps the trauma from intruding. I cut so that I will not kill myself. It is a way that I can get attention. Although the vast majority of the cases that I'm familiar with, young people actually did a very good job of hiding this behavior. They're actually ashamed often about what they're doing, and they hide it well. It's a way to discharge my anger, tension, and despair. It's something that I can control. It's a way to punish myself. And a number of students have said something like this: why are the adults so upset that I engage in cutting? I mean, you know what my friends do? How they manage their stress? They go out, they get drunk. I stay home, I cut on Friday night. That's actually much better. Well, I don't think our communities and our families are willing to accept that cutting and burning are good ways for young people to cope with their problems. However, I do believe strongly that many communities and many families are looking the other way about the tremendous problem of substance abuse with young people. And perhaps I'll just share what I said to my own daughter. I said, Jill, I hope you won't drink at all. And by the way, the law says 21, Jill. I will never look the other way. I will never provide it. I will never condone it. And Jill, there's something that I think you need to know. Alcoholism runs in our family. Your grandparents, all four of them, in my humble opinion, all four of them were alcoholics. And what do you think that says about a predisposition for alcoholism in our family? And I actually believe we have to hold families and adults accountable who provide the alcohol, who look the other way, because it is very involved in many problems and tragedies with young people. Back exclusively to talking about self-injury. Here is an excerpt from a poem, and as you listen to it, I think it'll give you insight in terms of how powerful this behavior is. Turn up the music and set the mood. Once is never enough. Quivering with anticipation, watch it if the drop spills over and runs down my arm. Crimson orgasm, you seduce me every time, Mr. Knife. Now, is that kid going to stop cutting just because somebody tells them to? We're going to have to provide treatment. It's going to be a struggle. There are going to be some ups and downs. Also, the literature talks about something red being central to the experience. And how could we possibly use that with substitute behaviors? Well, instead of cutting your arm, how about a red magic marker on the arm? How about a red magic marker on paper? One person shared, I used the red nail polish. I put it on my arms, I let it dry, and then I flick it off. Admittedly not a great behavior, but certainly much better than actually engaging in cutting.